Hello, Patreon, and welcome into another Hidden Track podcast. This is number 3. This is where you've listened to the full CD, you get to the end, but wait, there's 5 minutes of silence, and then suddenly a new song comes on. It's a hidden track. These are shorter, bite-sized podcasts where I take a topic that we spoke about on the main In My Footsteps podcast and give it a little more love, its own segment, its own shine. In the past, I have spoken about such topics as the isolator helmet, the TV hat, and the Gilbert Atomic Energy Lab. For this episode, we're going to be talking about something that probably all of you have seen or experienced at least once in your life. Not so much anymore, but definitely in the 80s and 90s, and that is the telephone booth. This popped into my head as something, one of those, you don't see those anymore. But then every now and then you do see a telephone booth somewhere. That's a good way to start this off. When was the last time that you saw a telephone booth? Not used it, but just saw one. I'm sure if I got in my car and drove around, I might be able to find one. But just in daily life, I am thinking it has been 7 or 8 years since I've seen a phone booth. Obviously, for this podcast, I did research on the phone booth. I know, my search history is so exciting. Better than in October when I do nothing but true crime on the main podcast and my search history is just murders. The interesting thing, or one of the interesting things that I found out was that the telephone booth traces its roots all the way back to the invention of the telephone itself. I don't know, for some reason I thought the telephone booth came out around World War II. I think I judged that on when I started seeing phone booths in the Three Stooges episodes. After Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone in 1876, early adopters quickly realized that the phone couldn't be limited to just private homes and businesses. The technology was expensive, lines were scarce, people needed occasional access rather than full ownership. The earliest public telephones appeared in the 1880s. They were often in hotels, railway stations, pharmacies, post offices, saloons. You could do drunk dialing in the 1880s. But these weren't booths. They were wall-mounted or desk-mounted telephones. Users would pay the establishment owner or an attendant who would manually connect the call to a switchboard. I know, phones were way more complicated back then than they are now. It was by the 1890s that telephone companies began installing purpose-built booths. These first telephone booths were typically made of wood, enclosed on 3 sides, fitted with a door or a heavy curtain. They would be poorly ventilated and dimly lit. It's like back then, you had to really want to speak to someone to go through all that trouble to go to a payphone and stand in some sweat box that was dark. In 1891, inventor William Gray patented the coin-operated telephone. This was a critical innovation that made unattended public phones practical. Because before then, you had to have someone standing by the phone all the time to take your money and connect you. Whereas now, users could deposit coins directly into the machine. Phone attendant seems to be a job that disappeared like around the turn of the 20th century. As coin-operated phones spread, booths became more standardized. And by the early 20th century, telephone booths were common fixtures, especially in urban centers in the US and Europe. It was during the 1920s and 30s that telephone booths became a normal part of everyday life. The designs were improved, so you had metal-framed booths, glass panels for visibility and safety, interior lighting, improved sound insulation so you could actually hear the people you're talking to. I think it was still back then that you had that big mouthpiece to speak into and that one little earpiece that you would hold up to hear. It wasn't like phones are now where the microphone and speaker are in the same vicinity. In the United States, you had companies like the Bell System working to standardize booth design, where they were placed along sidewalks, in subway stations, inside office buildings. Many cities required them to be easily visible and accessible. The telephone booth then became a symbol of modern times. They represented speed, connectivity, and progress, hallmarks of the industrial age. It's sort of like how cell phones were at the turn of the 21st century. When everybody started to get them, it was like, ooh, you're part of the modern age. You've got your own telephone in your pocket. During World War II, telephone booths took on new significance. They were vital for military coordination, emergency communications, family contacting loved ones. They were considered essential infrastructure, and their use surged during the war years, which I think that's why I always assumed that's when the phone booth first came around. The golden age of the telephone booth is considered to be the 50s through the 70s. I think it goes along with the post-war boom in the country. It was during this time that the phone booth became more refined and recognizable. Aluminum and steel frames, tempered glass panels, ventilation grills so you wouldn't sweat it out in there, fold-down shelves for directories, yellow pages. For all you young listeners, yes, there used to be phone books, white pages, yellow pages. In the US at this time is when the phone booth became kind of standard as far as the design, bright signage reading telephone, phone books being chained to the inside. It was around this time in the United Kingdom where they had that iconic red telephone box, which interestingly, probably a 20-minute drive from me in the town of Osterville on Cape Cod, down by one of their marinas, they actually have a red phone booth there. It's got nothing in it, but it's like the skeleton of it is still there. It was around this time, 50s through the 70s, that telephone booths became embedded in pop culture. You had Superman changing into his costume inside a phone booth, film noir using booths as symbols of secrecy and urgency, teenagers using them for late-night calls or shoving a lot of their friends to see who could fit the most people into one. They became social spaces, sites of romance, drama, tragedy, graffiti, carved initials, abandoned notes. It also became kind of the stuff of urban legend. This is another reason why I decided to do this topic for the podcast, was to talk a little bit about the famed Mojave Desert phone booth. I even created it for the cover art of this Hidden Track podcast. There was literally a phone booth in the middle of the Mojave Desert. This was in southeastern California, 12 miles from the nearest paved road at the intersection of two dirt roads. So if you got lost in the desert, you might come upon a phone booth. It was actually originally set up in 1948 to help local miners in the area if there was an emergency. It was pretty unknown for probably the first 50 years of its existence, but it became one of the first internet sensations. 1997, someone went out there and stumbled upon it, found it, took pictures of it. So it became kind of a pilgrimage for people to wander out into the desert and find this phone booth and take pictures of it. Sadly, in 2000, the phone booth was removed. Even the concrete pad that the phone booth stood on has been removed because I guess they didn't want people wandering the desert and having something happen to them. In the 70s through the 1990s, you had a lot of telecommunication evolution. Phone booths started to get push-button dialing, replacing the rotary phones, which I am old enough that we had rotary phones when I was a kid, making dialing people that had 9s and 0s in their number a pain. You would have credit cards and calling card readers. This is when you got a lot of the commercials for the calling cards, like 1010 321 and all this other stuff. I might do a segment on those on the podcast at some point. But this was kind of the end of the age of the phone booth, the telephone in general, as far as being a public thing. I can't remember many times me using a phone booth, even as a kid in the 80s. I know the corner store that I used to go walk to with my friends when I was 10, 11 years old, there were a couple of phone booths. When I really think about it, I think the last time I ever used a phone booth was freshman year of high school. And that was for my friend Hassan and I to call my mother for a ride when the party we went to, the police showed up to. He and I ran and we had to find a phone booth and call. We were innocent kids. We didn't do anything bad. But then when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, phone booths were still everywhere. But even then, they seemed like they were relics of a bygone era. This only got worse with the rapid expansion of mobile phones in the late 90s into the early 2000s, because cell phones offered constant personal access, and phone booths generated less revenue. Maintenance costs to keep these phone booths up rose, because they might not get used as much for phone calls, but they'd get damaged, super glue the receiver down. Not like I did that. It is said, numbers say that there were more than 2 million phone booths in 1999, and as of 2024, there are fewer than 100,000 phone booths left in the United States. It's one of those things that as their numbers started to dwindle, as I got a cell phone, I got my first cell phone in 2003. It's like I didn't care that phone booths were going away. And then it was probably 2018, I happened upon a phone booth, and it was like I had been transported back to my childhood. Suddenly it mattered again. Like, oh my God, there's a phone booth. I didn't call anyone, but seeing one made me feel like a kid again. Most of the nearly 2 million phone booths were destroyed. Others found second lives as mini libraries, Wi-Fi hotspots, art installations, defibrillator stations, tourist information kiosks, maybe cell phone charging stations. If you are curious, and I was, so I went and looked it up, there is a website that has listings of phone booths. It's called payphoneproject.com. I'll put a link in the description for this podcast if you want to go and see where the nearest phone booth is near you. Go make a collect call to someone. I wonder if you could do prank calls from these payphones. They would have caller ID, but it wouldn't be your name. It would just be the location. Ooh, see? There's a way to get into shenanigans. I don't think making prank phone calls when I'm close to 50 would be as funny as when I did them when I was 15, but you never know. For people of my generation, telephone booths are remembered with a mix of nostalgia and fascination. I would say fascination more for the younger people that came after, ones who grew up with all the technology, to not only see a telephone, a real phone that someone's got plugged into the wall, but to see a phone that's just inside a booth like on the side of a building. But phone booths represent a time when communication required effort and patience. I know that if cell phones were gone tomorrow and we went back to 1995, I could definitely live then and I could use a phone booth. It wouldn't be a problem. The telephone booth's history mirrors the broader story of human communication. It went from scarcity to everyone having it, from public to personal, once essential infrastructure. Telephone booths shaped urban life for nearly a century before becoming relics. Though largely gone, their cultural footprint remains unmistakable. You can picture one in your head right now if I say picture a phone booth. And I bet you never thought that this topic on this podcast would make you feel the nostalgia. But it does. The glass walls, the coin slot, the ringing bell. These elements still echo in our collective memory, reminding us of a time when making a call meant stepping into a small box and briefly disconnecting from the world around you. And that, my Patreon friends, is the story of the history of the phone booth, hidden track number 3. Go to payphoneproject.com, find the nearest phone booth to you, go make a call or at least go look at it. Take a picture of it, put it on social media for some clout. And I'll be back next time with another hidden track. Who knows what subject I'll be talking about? I bet you couldn't have predicted phone booths. But until next time, I am Christopher Setterlin, but you already knew that. And I'll talk to you next time, Patreon.